In 1977, a Jamaican musician walked onto the stage at London's Rainbow Theatre, his dreadlocks catching the golden stage lights, his thin frame draped in a worn denim shirt. The air was thick with anticipation and sweet-smelling smoke. As his fingers found the opening chords of No Woman, No Cry, the crowd of 5,000 people, black and white, rich and poor, young and old, fell into a reverent silence before erupting into a collective sway. This wasn't just a concert. It was a communion, a moment of unity in a world fractured by race, class, and politics. The man on stage, Bob Marley, had somehow transcended every barrier, his voice raw with the pain of oppression, yet somehow still tender with hope and love. But the prophet standing before them, bathed in stage light like a halo, had emerged from darkness so profound that his very survival, let alone his ascension, seemed impossible. Our story begins in the concrete jungle of Kingston, Jamaica, Trench Town, where corrugated metal shacks baked under the Caribbean sun, where gunshots punctuated the night like terrible thunder, where dreams withered before they could bloom. This is the untold story of how a mixed-race boy, rejected by both black and white society, rose from these broken streets to become the third world's first international superstar, and how his music became the soundtrack for revolution, redemption, and hope across the globe. This is the story of Bob Marley. The story of Robert Nesta Marley begins not in the urban chaos of Kingston, but in the quiet hills of 9 Mile, St. Ann Parish. Born on February 6, 1945, he entered a world divided by color and class, a division he embodied in his very blood. His mother, Cedella Malcolm, was just 18, a black Jamaican woman with deep roots in the rural countryside. His father, Norval Sinclair Marley, was a white Jamaican of British descent, nearly 60 years old, and a captain in the British West Indies Regiment. My father was a white man, Marley would later say, his voice carrying no bitterness, only fact. He was a captain, and my mother was a black woman, country, and because of this, they never married. He was a very wealthy man, and my mother was a very poor woman. In the 1940s Jamaica, still under British colonial rule, such relationships existed in the shadows. Norval provided financial support but was largely absent from his son's life, appearing occasionally before vanishing again. He died when Bob was just 10 years old, leaving the boy with little more than a complexion that set him apart. "They called me White Boy," Marley once recalled of his childhood. "I didn't have any friends. Nobody wanted to be friends with me. Too light-skinned for the black community, too dark for the white, young Bob learned early what it meant to exist in the in-between spaces, a lesson that would later infuse his music with its universal appeal. Life in 9 Mile was hard but simple. The hills were lush, the air clean, the rhythm of life dictated by sunrise and sunset. Young Bob helped his mother tend to their small plot of land, learning the value of hard work and the bitter taste of poverty. But it was the move to Kingston in 1957 that would truly forge the man who would become Bob Marley. Cedella had remarried and moved to Trench Town, one of Kingston's most notorious slums. The name was grimly literal. The neighborhood had been built over an open sewage trench. Here, zinc-roofed shacks pressed against each other like teeth in a broken mouth. The air hung heavy with the stench of garbage and desperation. "Trench Town rock," Marley would later sing, transforming his suffering into poetry. "We come from Trench Town. Most of them come from Trench Town." For a 12-year-old boy from the countryside, Kingston was a shock to the system. Violence was not an event, but a condition. Poverty was not a circumstance, but an identity. Hope was a luxury few could afford. In the ghetto, it's not like you grow, Marley would later explain. You don't grow, you just get old. But Trenchtown offered something 9 Mile could not: music. The neighborhood pulsed with sound: American R&B from Radio Jamaica, traditional Jamaican folk songs, and the emerging sounds of ska and rocksteady. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was escape, expression, and sometimes the only way to process the harsh realities of ghetto life. It was here that Bob met Neville "Bunny" Livingston and Peter McIntosh, later known as Peter Tosh, fellow outcasts who shared his passion for music. Together they would spend hours harmonizing, mimicking the American doo-wop and R&B groups they heard on the radio. "We used to practice harmony every day," Bunny Wailer later recalled. "We'd go under a mango tree and just sing, sing, sing until we got it right." But music wasn't the only transformative force in young Bob's life. In the early 1960s, he encountered Rastafarianism, a religious movement that had emerged in Jamaica in the 1930s. Rastafarians believed that Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, was the living God, and that black people were the true Israelites who would one day return to Africa. For a young man struggling with his identity in a society that valued whiteness over blackness, Rastafarianism offered powerful answers. It taught that black people were divine, that Africa was the promised land, and that suffering was temporary. Liberation was coming. "Rasta taught me to know myself," Marley would later say. "Before Rasta, I didn't know myself." In 1963, Bob, Peter, and Bunny formed the Wailers. The trio had grown up together in Trenchtown, sharing the same struggles and dreams. Their early songs reflected their reality: poverty, violence, and the search for hope in a hopeless place. Their break came when they auditioned for Clement Coxone Dodd at Studio One, Jamaica's premier recording facility. Dodd was impressed by their raw talent and signed them immediately. Their first single, "Simmer Down," became a massive hit in Jamaica in 1964, reaching #1 and establishing the Wailers as rising stars. But success in Jamaica didn't mean financial success. The music industry on the island was notorious for exploiting artists, and the Wailers saw little money from their hits. Bob took odd jobs, welding, working as a lab assistant, even briefly joining his mother in Delaware to make ends meet. During this period, Bob dedicated himself to perfecting his craft. He practiced guitar obsessively, developing the distinctive rhythmic style that would become his signature. He studied the Bible and Rastafarian teachings, incorporating spiritual themes into his lyrics. By the late 1960s, the Wailers had evolved from a ska group into something entirely new. As Jamaica's music scene shifted from the upbeat sounds of ska to the slower, more soulful rhythms of rocksteady and then reggae, the Wailers were at the forefront of each transition. But Bob Marley's true journey was just beginning. The shy, mixed-race boy from 9 Mile was about to become the voice of the oppressed, the prophet of reggae, and one of the most influential musicians in history. The concrete jungle had forged him. Now it was time for the world to hear his message. The early 1970s, Jamaica was a powder keg ready to explode. The island had gained independence from Britain in 1962, but freedom had not brought prosperity to most Jamaicans. Political violence between the ruling Jamaica Labour Party and the opposition People's National Party had turned Kingston into a war zone. Gang warfare in the ghettos claimed hundreds of lives, and the police responded with brutal crackdowns that only increased the suffering of the poor. "Every day the bucket goes to the well," Marley would sing. "One day the bottom will drop out." Into this chaos stepped Bob Marley and the Wailers. no longer just musicians, but voices of resistance and hope. Their music had evolved from the simple ska of their early days into something deeper, more rhythmic, more revolutionary. They weren't just singing about love and dancing anymore. They were singing about justice, about freedom, about fighting back against a system designed to crush the poor. "Cold ground was my bed last night," Marley sang in Talking Blues, his voice carrying the weight of generations of suffering. "And rock was my pillow, too." The breakthrough came through Chris Blackwell, a white Jamaican entrepreneur who had founded Island Records. Blackwell had been following the Wailers' career and recognized their potential to reach international audiences. In 1972, he offered them something unprecedented: creative control and a substantial advance to record an album for international release. "I wanted to present reggae music in a way that would make it accessible to a rock audience," Blackwell later explained. Bob had the charisma and the message to cross over. The result was Catch a Fire, released in 1973. It was unlike anything the world had heard before, a perfect fusion of Jamaican reggae rhythms with rock production values. Songs like Concrete Jungle and Slave Driver spoke of urban despair and historical injustice, while Stir It Up showcased Marley's ability to write sensual love songs. The album didn't sell millions, but it caught the attention of critics and fellow musicians. The Wailers were invited to tour the United Kingdom, opening for American soul singer Johnny Nash. When Nash dropped out of the tour, the Wailers stayed on, performing for small but enthusiastic crowds. A pivotal moment came when they were invited to perform on the BBC's Old Grey Whistle Test, bringing their hypnotic rhythms and revolutionary message into British living rooms. The performance was electrifying, Marley's charisma and intensity burning through the television screen, but success brought its own challenges. In 1974, after the release of their second album for Island, Burnin', both Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer left the group, citing frustration with touring and concerns that the international push was compromising their message. "The music business is a cruel and shallow money trench," Marley would later observe. "A long plastic hallway where thieves and pimps run free and good men die like dogs." Rather than fold, Marley rebuilt. He renamed the group Bob Marley and the Wailers, recruited new members, including a female backing vocal trio called the I-Threes, which included his wife Rita, and pushed forward. The next album, Natty Dread, released in 1974, marked a turning point. Songs like No Woman No Cry showed a more personal, vulnerable side of Marley, while Revolution and Them Belly Full But We Hungry continued his political commentary. A triumphant performance at London's Lyceum Theatre in July 1975 was recorded for the live album Live. The recording of No Woman No Cry from this concert became Marley's first hit single outside Jamaica, reaching number 22 on the UK charts. Back in Jamaica, however, the political situation was deteriorating. The rivalry between the JLP and PNP had turned Kingston into a battleground. Marley, now a prominent figure, was seen as someone who could potentially unite the divided nation. He agreed to headline the Smile Jamaica concert, scheduled for December 5, 1976. The concert was intended to ease political tensions, but it was widely perceived as supporting the incumbent PNP government of Michael Manley. 2 days before the concert, on December 3rd, the unthinkable happened. December 3rd, 1976. The air in Kingston was electric with tension. As evening fell, Bob Marley was rehearsing with his band at his home at 56 Hope Road when the gates crashed open. 7 gunmen stormed the property, firing wildly. I heard the gates crash open," recalled Marley's wife Rita, who took a bullet to the head but miraculously survived. Then the shooting started. It was like being in a war. Marley himself was struck in the arm and chest. The bullet in his arm would remain there for the rest of his life, too close to vital nerves to be safely removed. "When they shot me, they shot through flesh," Marley would later say, touching the scar on his chest. "But they couldn't kill my spirit." Yet just 2 days later, with the bullet still in his body, Marley took the stage at the Smile Jamaica concert. When asked why he would risk his life to perform, he simply said, "The people who are trying to make this world worse aren't taking a day off. How can I?" Those words, that defiance in the face of death, transformed Marley from a musician into something more, a symbol of courage, of resistance, of unbreakable spirit. But the attempt on his life forced Marley into exile. He fled to London, where the distance from his homeland and the trauma of the shooting plunged him into one of his darkest periods. It was from this darkness, this exile, this brush with death, that his most powerful work would emerge. Exodus, released in 1977, was a masterpiece, a perfect fusion of the personal and political, the spiritual and the sensual. The title track was a call to action, urging listeners to join the movement of Jah people. Jamming and Three Little Birds offered messages of hope and resilience. One Love People Get Ready was a plea for unity in a divided world. The album stayed on the British charts for 56 consecutive weeks. Time magazine would later name it the album of the century. During his exile in London, Marley's global profile continued to rise. He toured extensively, bringing his message to new audiences across Europe and North America. His concerts were no longer just musical performances. They were spiritual experiences, political rallies, celebrations of life itself. In May 1977, Marley discovered a wound on his toe that he had sustained during a football game. The wound refused to heal, and when doctors examined it, they discovered malignant melanoma, skin cancer. Doctors advised amputation, but Marley refused, citing his Rastafarian beliefs that the body should remain whole. Instead, the cancerous tissue was removed, and Marley continued to tour and record as if nothing had happened. "Life and death are in the power of the tongue," he said, refusing to speak of his illness. But the cancer would not be denied by the silence. Unknown to Marley and his fans, it was already spreading throughout his body. In 1978, Marley returned to Jamaica for the first time since the assassination attempt to perform at the One Love Peace concert. In a moment that has become legendary, he called the two rival political leaders, Michael Manley and Edward Seaga, onto the stage and joined their hands above his head in a gesture of unity. "The people who are making the world worse are not taking a day off," he told the crowd, echoing his words from 2 years earlier. "How can I?" For a brief moment it seemed as if Marley's vision of one love might actually transform Jamaica's violent political landscape. But the peace would not last, and Marley would soon be forced to confront his own mortality. By 1979, Bob Marley was at the height of his powers. His album Survival was his most overtly political work yet, with songs like Zimbabwe explicitly supporting African liberation movements. When Zimbabwe, formerly Rhodesia, gained independence in 1980, Marley was the only foreign artist invited to perform at the celebration. "Africa unite," he sang, his voice carrying across the continent, "'cause we're moving right out of Babylon and we're going to our father's land." His next album, Uprising, released in 1980, continued this theme of liberation but with a more spiritual focus. Songs like Redemption Song stripped away the band entirely, featuring just Marley and an acoustic guitar, his voice raw and vulnerable. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Those words, perhaps his most famous, were adapted from a speech by Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican political activist who had inspired the Rastafarian movement. They encapsulated Marley's message: true freedom begins in the mind. The Uprising Tour in 1980 would be Marley's last. He performed to the largest crowds of his career, including a legendary show at Madison Square Garden where he opened for the Commodores. But something was wrong. Marley, always lean, was losing weight. His energy, once boundless, was flagging. During a jogging session in Central Park, he collapsed. Medical tests revealed the terrible truth. The cancer that had begun in his toe had spread to his lungs, liver, and brain. Doctors gave him just weeks to live. Marley's final concert was on September 23, 1980, at the Stanley Theater in Pittsburgh. Those who were there recall a performance of astonishing power and poignancy. Though clearly ill, Marley gave everything he had, as if he knew this would be his last time on stage. After the tour, Marley sought treatment in Germany under the care of controversial physician Joseph Issels, whose unconventional therapies offered a last hope. For 8 months he fought against the advancing cancer, his dreadlocks falling out from the treatments, his once powerful frame reduced to skin and bone. As death approached, Marley's thoughts turned to Jamaica and to Africa. He longed to die in Ethiopia, the spiritual homeland of Rastafarianism, but he was too weak to complete the journey. On a flight home to Jamaica, his condition worsened, and the plane was diverted to Miami. On May 11, 1981, at the age of just 36, Bob Marley died at the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital, now University of Miami Hospital. His last words to his son Ziggy were, "Money can't buy life." Jamaica declared a national day of mourning. Marley's body was flown back to his homeland, where it lay in state at the National Arena, allowing thousands to pay their respects. His funeral on May 21st combined elements of Ethiopian Orthodox and Rastafarian traditions. As the casket was carried to its final resting place in 9 Mile, where his life had begun, the crowds sang his songs, not in mourning, but in celebration of a life that had touched millions. "My life is only important if I can help many people," Marley once said. By that measure, his life had been immeasurably important. But the end of Bob Marley's life was not the end of his influence. In many ways, it was just the beginning. In the years since his death, Bob Marley's legacy has only grown. His compilation album, Legend, released in 1984, became the best-selling reggae album of all time, introducing his music to new generations. His songs have been covered by artists across every genre, from Eric Clapton's version of "I Shot the Sheriff" to Rihanna's interpretation of Redemption Song. His image has become one of the most recognizable in the world, adorning everything from T-shirts to coffee mugs. But Marley's true legacy goes far beyond merchandise and music sales. He achieved what few artists ever do. He changed the way people think. In Jamaica, Marley's influence extended beyond music into politics. The truce he helped broker at the One Love Peace concert didn't last, but his vision of a Jamaica united across political lines remains a powerful ideal. Internationally, his music helped bring attention to the struggles of people in developing nations. Songs like "Zimbabwe" and "Africa Unite" provided a soundtrack for liberation movements across the African continent. His message of one love has been embraced by peace movements worldwide. In 2005, the United Nations designated One Love as the anthem for its World Humanitarian Day. Perhaps most remarkably, Marley achieved all this while remaining true to his roots. He never watered down his message or his music to achieve commercial success. He spoke openly about his Rastafarian faith, his use of marijuana as a sacrament, and his belief in the divinity of Haile Selassie, all positions that could have alienated mainstream audiences. "The truth is, everyone is going to hurt you," Marley once said. "You just got to find the ones worth suffering for." Marley's children have carried on his musical legacy. His sons Ziggy, Stephen, Damien, Kaimani, and Julian have all become successful reggae artists in their own right. His daughter Cedella has pursued careers in fashion and literature, helping to manage the Marley family brand. The Bob Marley Foundation, established after his death, continues his charitable work focusing on education, health, and community development in Jamaica. In 1999, Time magazine named Bob Marley's Exodus the album of the century. The BBC declared One Love the song of the millennium. In 2001, he was awarded the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. But perhaps the most telling testament to Marley's legacy is the fact that his music continues to resonate with people who were born long after his death. People who have never known the specific struggles he sang about, but who recognize the universal truths in his lyrics. "My music will go on forever," Marley once predicted. "Maybe it's a fool say that, but when me know facts, me can say facts. My music will go on forever." From the hills of 9 Mile to the slums of Trenchtown to concert stages around the world, Bob Marley's journey was unlikely, remarkable, and all too brief. But in just 36 years, he created a body of work that continues to inspire, to comfort, and to challenge. In a world still divided by race, class, and politics, his message of one love, one heart, one destiny remains as relevant as ever. "The greatness of a man," Marley said, "is not in how much wealth he acquires, but in his integrity and his ability to affect those around him positively." By that measure, Bob Marley was truly great indeed.